In 197 BC, on the rugged hills of Thessaly in northern Greece, a quiet morning was about to give way to a moment that would redefine the balance of power in the ancient world. Mist clung to the uneven ridgelines, obscuring movement and blurring the line between caution and confrontation. This was not a battlefield chosen for comfort. It was a landscape that would test discipline, adaptability, and leadership under pressure. On one side stood the Macedonian Phalanx, a formation forged in the legacy of Alexander the Great. Dense, disciplined, and nearly impenetrable from the front, it had long been considered the pinnacle of battlefield dominance. A wall of overlapping shields and extended pikes, it moved as a single, unified force, powerful, but dependent on order and terrain. Facing them was a very different kind of army. The Roman legion did not rely on a single formation, but on flexibility. Broken into smaller units capable of independent action, it was designed to adapt, respond, and exploit opportunity in the chaos of battle. Where the Phalanx demanded precision, the legion thrived in unpredictability. What unfolded on these hills was more than a clash of armies. It was a collision of ideas. Tradition versus innovation. Rigidity versus flexibility. By the end of the day, one system would prove superior, and the outcome would send shockwaves across the Mediterranean world, reshaping the future of power, strategy, and empire. By the early 2nd century BC, the Mediterranean world was already reeling from one of the most brutal conflicts in its history, the Second Punic War. For over a decade, Rome had fought for survival against Hannibal, a commander whose name alone could unsettle even the most seasoned leaders. Entire Roman armies had been wiped out, cities threatened, alliances shaken. And yet, against all odds, Rome endured. When the war finally ended in 201 BC, Carthage lay broken, its power shattered, its ambitions reduced to survival under Roman terms. But Rome was no longer the same republic that had entered that war. It had been tested, hardened, and transformed. Victory over Carthage did more than secure Rome's position in the West. It unlocked something far more consequential: ambition. No longer confined to the Italian peninsula, Rome began to look outward with a new sense of purpose. Across the Adriatic Sea lay a region rich in influence, culture, and opportunity: Greece and the wider Hellenistic world. For Roman leaders, this was not just geography, it was the next frontier. Standing in that path was the kingdom of Macedon, ruled by King Philip V. Macedon was not an unknown or insignificant power. It carried the legacy of Alexander the Great, whose conquests had once stretched from Greece to the edges of India. Though those vast territories had fragmented after his death, Macedon remained a formidable force, deeply rooted in military tradition and political influence across Greece. But Philip V had made a critical miscalculation during Rome's darkest hour. While Rome struggled against Hannibal, Philip saw an opportunity. He aligned himself with Carthage, hoping that Rome would fall and that Macedon could expand its influence westward. It was a strategic gamble, one that might have paid off if Rome had collapsed. But Rome didn't collapse. It adapted, endured, and ultimately won. And in the aftermath of that victory, Rome did not forget. What followed was not immediate war, but growing tension. Rome began positioning itself as a protector of Greek states, many of whom feared Macedonian dominance. Diplomatic pressure mounted. Alliances shifted. To Rome, Philip was no longer just a distant king, he was a rival who had once bet against them and could do so again. To Philip, Rome's increasing involvement in Greek affairs was an intrusion, a threat to Macedon's traditional sphere of influence. This collision course became unavoidable. The fragile balance of power in the region began to crack, and by 200 BC, open conflict erupted, what history would remember as the Second Macedonian War. At its core, this war was about more than territory. It was about influence, credibility, and the future shape of power in the Mediterranean. Rome was stepping onto a larger stage, testing whether its military system, forged in the fires of Italy and Carthage, could stand against the established powers of the Greek world. Macedon, on the other hand, was fighting to preserve its legacy, its authority, and its relevance in a rapidly changing landscape. Both sides entered the conflict with confidence, but also with something to prove. Rome needed to demonstrate that its rise was not limited to the West. Macedon needed to show that the age of Hellenistic dominance was not yet over. As tensions escalated and armies maneuvered, the stage was set for a confrontation that would answer those questions decisively. The hills of Thessaly would soon become the proving ground, not just for two armies, but for two visions of warfare and power. To understand what truly happened at Cynoscephalae, you have to look beyond the battlefield and into the systems that shaped it. This was not just a clash of armies. It was a test of two fundamentally different approaches to power, organization, and decision-making under pressure. The Macedonian Phalanx was, in many ways, the product of a world that valued order above all else. Imagine thousands of men standing shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, each holding a sarissa, a pike stretching anywhere from 12 to 18 feet. From the front, it looked less like an army and more like a moving wall of steel. The first several ranks could project their pikes forward simultaneously, creating layers of lethal reach that few enemies could penetrate. When deployed on flat, open ground, the Phalanx was devastating. It didn't just fight, it overwhelmed. Momentum, cohesion, and discipline turned it into a force that could crush opposition head-on with brutal efficiency. But that strength came with a cost. The Phalanx depended on perfect alignment. Every soldier had to maintain position, spacing, and timing. If the formation broke, even slightly, its effectiveness dropped sharply. Uneven terrain, sudden maneuvers, or attacks from the side or rear could disrupt that delicate structure. And once disrupted, the Phalanx struggled to recover. It wasn't designed for flexibility, it was built for dominance under ideal conditions. The Roman legion operated on an entirely different philosophy. Instead of relying on one massive formation, the Romans broke their forces into smaller, self-contained units called maniples. These units were arranged in a staggered, checkerboard pattern, allowing them to move independently while still supporting one another. It was a system that prioritized adaptability over rigidity. Each maniple could advance, retreat, or pivot without waiting for the entire army to react. This gave Roman commanders a level of control that was rare in the ancient world. If one section of the line encountered trouble, another could reinforce it. If an opportunity appeared, nearby units could exploit it quickly. The legion wasn't just a formation, it was a network of coordinated parts, capable of responding in real time to the chaos of battle. This structure also made the Roman army far more effective on difficult terrain. Hills, ridges, and broken ground, conditions that could disrupt a phalanx, became opportunities for the legion. Where the Macedonians needed order, the Romans could operate in controlled disorder, adjusting their movements without losing cohesion. At its core, the difference between these two systems reflects a broader contrast that still resonates today. The phalanx represents scale and uniformity, power derived from doing one thing exceptionally well. The legion represents flexibility and resilience, power derived from the ability to adapt, iterate, and respond under changing conditions. On paper, both systems were formidable. In the right circumstances, either could dominate. But battles are rarely fought under perfect conditions. They are shaped by uncertainty, terrain, timing, and human decision-making. Cynoscephalae would become the moment where these differences were no longer theoretical. It would show, in real and unforgiving terms, what happens when a system built for control meets one built for change. The morning of the battle did not begin with a grand charge or a clear line of sight. Instead, it opened in uncertainty. A dense fog hung low over the hills of Thessaly, muting sound and swallowing movement. Visibility was limited, and for both armies, the terrain became as much a threat as the enemy. Commanders on either side knew they were close, but not exactly where. In a world without modern communication or surveillance, that kind of ambiguity could shape the outcome before the first major clash even began. So both sides did what experienced armies always do in the face of the unknown. They probed. Small reconnaissance units were sent forward, tasked with finding the enemy, securing advantageous ground, and reporting back before committing the full force. These weren't meant to start a battle. They were meant to prevent one from starting on the wrong terms. But that's not how it played out. Somewhere along the ridgelines, through the fog and broken ground, the two scouting forces stumbled into each other. What began as a cautious search instantly turned into contact. Javelins were thrown. Projectiles cut through the mist. Lines weren't formed, commands weren't fully coordinated. This was raw, immediate engagement. And in that moment, the battle effectively began, whether either side had intended it or not. As the skirmish intensified, neither commander could afford to ignore it. What started as a small clash began to pull in more men. Reinforcements were sent forward, not in a single, organized wave, but in pieces. Units fed into the fight as the situation escalated. This kind of gradual commitment created a dangerous dynamic. The battlefield wasn't forming cleanly, it was growing unevenly, with pressure building in unpredictable ways. For the Romans, under the command of Flaminius, holding the high ground became a priority. Even without full visibility, he understood the stakes. If the Macedonian phalanx managed to deploy on favorable terrain, flat, open, and organized, it could become nearly unstoppable. So instead of waiting, Flaminius chose to reinforce the developing clash, pushing more troops forward to stabilize the situation and prevent the enemy from gaining positional advantage. On the Macedonian side, the response was less coordinated, though not necessarily less aggressive. Elements of their force began moving toward the engagement, but not all at once. Some units were still repositioning, others possibly caught off guard by how quickly the situation had escalated. What mattered was this: the battle was no longer unfolding according to a single, deliberate plan. It was being shaped in real time by reaction. As more soldiers poured into the fray, the fog began to lift, both literally and figuratively. The scale of the confrontation became clearer, but so did the chaos. Missiles filled the air, javelins, arrows, sling stones, cutting down men before they ever reached close combat. The ridges echoed with the sounds of impact, confusion, and urgency. This was no longer a reconnaissance mission. It was a growing conflict that neither side could easily disengage from. What makes this phase so critical is not just the violence, but the lack of structure. Neither army had fully deployed. Lines were incomplete. Units were arriving at different times, in different formations, on uneven ground. It was, in many ways, the exact opposite of how both systems were designed to fight. And yet, decisions still had to be made. Flaminius chose commitment over hesitation, reinforcing his forward elements before they could collapse. On the other side, Macedonian forces continued to feed into the fight, but without full cohesion. These early choices, made under pressure with limited information, set the conditions for everything that followed. Because by the time the main armies would fully engage, the battle would already be tilted. Not by a single decisive move, but by a series of small, reactive decisions made in the fog, where confusion, not clarity, dictated the opening moves of one of history's most important clashes. As the fog thinned and the battlefield finally revealed itself, the true nature of the fight began to take shape, and at first, it favored Macedon. On one sector of the field, Philip V's right wing had successfully formed into a proper phalanx and was advancing downhill with terrifying momentum. Rank after rank of sarissas angled forward, creating a bristling wall that was nearly impossible to approach. When the Roman front line made contact, the result was immediate and brutal. The hastati, despite throwing their pila effectively, found themselves pushed back, their formations buckling under the relentless pressure. This was exactly the kind of engagement the phalanx was built for: direct, forceful, and overwhelming. The Roman left began to give ground. Men were cut down, formations strained, and for a moment, it looked as if the battle might collapse in Macedon's favor. Flaminius understood the danger. If this section broke completely, the entire Roman line could unravel. He was facing a situation every leader recognizes, the point where hesitation becomes defeat. But instead of reinforcing failure, he looked for leverage. What he saw was not just the strength of Philip's right, but the weakness elsewhere. While the Macedonian right pressed forward in disciplined formation, the left wing under Nicanor was in a very different state. Those troops were still arriving, climbing uneven terrain, not yet fully organized, and crucially, not formed into a cohesive phalanx. In modern terms, they were mid-deployment, exposed, fragmented, and vulnerable. Flaminius made a decisive call. He shifted focus and committed his right wing forward, accelerating the pace before the Macedonian left could stabilize. The Roman advance was fast, coordinated, and aggressive. War elephants, unpredictable, intimidating, and devastating against disorganized infantry, were pushed to the front. Instead of meeting a solid wall of pikes, they crashed into partial formations that couldn't hold. This is where the Roman system began to show its real advantage. Small units moved independently, identifying gaps and exploiting them in real time. There was no need to wait for a perfect alignment or a unified push. Openings appeared, and Roman soldiers moved into them immediately. The Macedonian left, unable to form properly, began to lose cohesion. Once that cohesion slipped, the Phalanx lost its defining strength. What should have been a unified front became a scattered collection of men trying to respond to multiple threats at once. Panic followed structure. The Macedonian left started to break. At this point, the battle split into two very different realities. On one side, Philip's right wing was still advancing, still winning, still unaware that the rest of the army was beginning to collapse. On the other side, the Roman right had shattered its opposition and was now in motion, pushing forward with momentum and confidence. And then came the moment that decided everything. Amid the chaos, an unnamed Roman tribune recognized an opportunity that others might have missed. Instead of continuing the straightforward pursuit, he detached a group of maniples, around 20, and maneuvered them across the uneven terrain, circling behind the Macedonian right. It was a bold move, requiring initiative and trust in the flexibility of the legion's structure. The Phalanx, for all its strength, had a critical vulnerability. It was built to face forward. Turning, especially on rough ground, was slow and difficult. Rear ranks were not equipped to defend against sudden attacks from behind. And that is exactly where the Romans struck. The impact was devastating. Caught off guard, the Macedonian right found itself attacked from the rear while still engaged at the front. The formation that had moments ago seemed unstoppable began to unravel. Sarissas overlapped awkwardly, ranks lost alignment, and communication broke down. What had been a coordinated advance turned into confusion. Once the structure collapsed, the soldiers were exposed. Roman legionaries closed in, using short swords in close combat, targeting flanks and backs. Without formation, the Phalanx was no longer a system. It was just individuals trying to survive. And individuals don't win against a coordinated force. Within a short span of time, the Macedonian right, once the strongest point on the field, began to crumble. With the left already routed and the right collapsing under pressure from both front and rear, the outcome was sealed. What started as a battle of strength ended as a demonstration of adaptability. The Phalanx had dominated where conditions favored it. But the legion didn't fight the battle on those terms. It changed the terms, and in doing so, changed the outcome. By the time the fighting ended, the result was undeniable. The Macedonian army had collapsed, not because it lacked courage or discipline, but because it could not adapt fast enough to a battlefield that refused to stay predictable. By the time the dust settled over the hills of Cynoscephalae, the outcome was no longer in doubt. It was etched into the ground itself. The cost for Macedon was devastating. Ancient accounts estimate that around 8,000 Macedonian soldiers lay dead, with another 5,000 captured. In contrast, Roman losses were significantly lighter, a stark reflection not just of victory, but of how decisively the tide had turned once momentum shifted. What began as a balanced contest had ended in collapse. King Philip V, who had moments earlier seemed poised for success on one wing, was forced to retreat with what remained of his army. There was no dramatic last stand, no reversal, just the quiet, unavoidable reality that the system he relied on had failed him under the conditions that mattered most. And in that retreat, something larger than a single battle was lost. Macedon's grip on power, its influence across Greece, and its legacy as the dominant force of the Hellenistic world all began to slip away. For Rome, this victory meant far more than a win on the battlefield. It marked a turning point, a signal that Roman power was no longer confined to the West. The Republic had stepped into the Greek world and proven that its methods, its structure, and its way of thinking about warfare could outperform even the most respected military traditions of the time. From this point forward, Rome wasn't just rising, it was expanding with purpose. Cynoscephalae stands as a reminder that strength alone is never enough. Adaptability, timing, and the ability to act decisively under pressure often define the outcome long before the final blow is struck. If you found this story insightful and want more deep dives into the battles that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts below. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.